I always sit here. This is my seat.
My boarding pass says 2A. I will not move. People like you don't belong in first class. I have every right to sit here, just like anyone else.
Follow the rules or step aside.
Your rules cannot erase my rights. I will not leave this seat.
The aisle seemed to shrink. The air pressed heavy on every chest, and the crowd leaned in with unspoken judgment. Faces turned, breath slowed, and the question lingered louder than the engines themselves. When power speaks louder than fairness, who decides what justice really is? But then, an unexpected turn made the entire cabin fall silent. You have a choice now. Do you agree with how she acted? Share your thoughts below, and remember to like this channel to keep the message alive. She had promised herself that this flight would be a rare pocket of quiet hours to breathe after days of meetings, yet the moment she stepped into the warm glow of the first-class cabin, the calm she pictured slipped away. The aisle hummed with the soft scrape of carry-ons and the whisper of wool coats, with the citrus note of disinfectant mingling into the round smell of freshly brewed coffee. Flight attendants moved with unhurried choreography as boarding music drifted through the speakers. Outside the windows, Los Angeles morning light lay pale over the tarmac, and talk of Thanksgiving plans drifted like low radio static. A nephew's football game, a drive up the coast, pie recipes traded with good humor. Alicia Carter felt the familiar fatigue of a week that had asked more than it ought to, but she also felt gratitude, the kind that comes with boarding early, sliding into a roomy seat, and exhaling. Her seat, C2A, was not hers. A stranger occupied it with the comfortable certainty of someone settling into a favorite booth. The woman, elegant in a camel coat and glossy heels, had placed a handbag on the ottoman and tucked a silk scarf behind her shoulder as if she were setting a stage. Alicia stopped, glanced at her boarding pass, then at the number above the window, 2A. She kept her tone even as she smiled, that practiced, neighborly smile that says, "We can fix this." "Good morning," she began, leaning enough to be heard over the boarding music. "I believe that seat is mine." The woman lifted her eyes, one slow beat, then looked Alicia over with a measuring curiosity that was not unkind so much as certain. "Oh," she said, drawing out the vow as though it were a ribbon. "I always request the left window. I'm sure they can find you another spot." She angled back to her phone as if the matter had been blessedly resolved. Alicia kept the smile. She was dressed simply in a dark sweater, soft trousers, low boots that did not pinch, and she could feel how the outfit read to strangers, comfortable but plain. She had worn a suit all week. The sweater was her small rebellion. She held out the boarding pass. "It's 2A, she said gently, on American Eagle, non-stop to New York. Would you mind checking yours?" From somewhere behind came the cheerful stutter of a child's laugh, a sound that always pricked Alicia's heart. She thought of how her mother would narrate a moment like this on the evening news, soothing tone, careful facts, and leaving the conclusions to the viewer. The woman in C2A looked at the pass without taking it, then tipped her head. "I am a long-time platinum," she said, the word landing like a credential placed on the conference table. "This is where I sit. If you ask the flight attendant, she will take care of you." "Hey." Alicia let the air out in a small, private breath and signaled to the flight attendant who was greeting passengers at the galley. The attendant came with the poised smile of someone trained to stand in a storm and call it a breeze. Her name tag reads Sophia. "Welcome aboard," she said, and it sounded kind. Alicia explained, brief and calm, showing the pass. Sophia glanced at the illuminated 2As over the window, then at the woman whose coat cost more than most people's rent, then back to Alicia. "Your boarding pass is correct," Sophia said brightly, and for a beat Alicia felt the small relief of being seen. The relief faded in the next sentence. "We do have an excellent aisle in row 3, very spacious. Would you consider taking that so we can get the door closed on time?" There it was, the small pivot that so often arrived dressed as reason. Alicia kept her voice gentle. "I would prefer the seat I was assigned." She saw the attendant's smile hold, just, and she watched the other woman, Rebecca, as Alicia would later learn, settle more deeply into the cushion, the way a person stakes a flag. A man across the aisle lifted his newspaper, then lowered it, undecided about whether to witness. Another passenger, a silver-haired woman in a cardigan the color of early apples, gave Alicia a flicker of sympathetic eye contact and then tucked it away. The cabin's soft lighting made everyone look kinder, but it did not soften the edges of posture or tone. Alicia set her carry-on into the overhead, moved with the practiced grace of someone who will not be the story even when the story finds her. "Perhaps we can compromise," Sophia offered in a voice like a harp string. "We are hoping for an on-time pushback. If you take 3C, I can make sure you receive a glass of sparkling water right away. Extra blanket, if you like. It is just for today." Alicia thought of the weeks-long tables, the way she had negotiated for hours while keeping the peace for people who would never know. She thought of the quiet she had promised herself and of how often compromise meant only one person moved. She studied Sophia's expression and saw the urgency beneath the smile. A schedule to keep, a cabin to soothe, a story to slow. Thank you, Alicia said. But I am going to sit in the seat that is printed on my pass. She kept her tone friendly, even as her heart thudded once with the body's reminder that dignity costs. The woman in the camel coat gave a little laugh, soft but edged. These things do happen, she said to Sophia, ignoring Alicia now, and I fly this route every other week. Surely there is some flexibility. She turned her phone screen toward her lap, as if to shield the private world that needed protecting. Sophia's smile stitched tighter. I will bring the captain, she said in the tone of someone offering a neutral expert. She retreated down the aisle with the efficient glide of a person who has done this before. Alicia stood in the small triangle of aisle beside the contested seat and let her gaze rest on the window, on the bright ramp where vehicles moved like patient animals. A ground crew worker in a neon vest walked past with a coil of hose and a knot so small it might have been a trick of light. Across from her, a businessman folded his reading glasses and cleared his throat, the universal prelude to advice. Sometimes it is easier, he murmured, not unkindly, to take the aisle. I pray, 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 I pray. Easier, Alicia repeated, not to him but to herself, tasting the word as if it were a tablet she had been prescribed too many times. The captain appeared with a crisp, spare presence of someone who had learned to make decisions with his jaw. His name was Daniel Harris, and he had a pilot's gracious eyes. He listened to Sophia's quick summary, then nodded to Alicia with a courteous tilt of the head. Ma'am, we are just trying to get everyone seated so we can depart on schedule. Would you be willing to take an alternate seat for today? We can offer you additional amenities. It was all so reasonable. Reasonableness, Alicia thought, was the velvet glove that so often covered the same hand. The line between courtesy and dismissal is a thin one, and it is crossed with a smile. Captain, she said, her voice steady, my seat assignment is seat 2A. That is where I intend to sit. And as to bigness. Sophia's eyes flicked toward the curtain that hid the galley, calculating delays, weighing consequences. The captain took another breath, prepared to broker the peace. Before he could speak, the woman in the camel coat, whose perfume had the powdery note of someone's grandmother's vanity, let a different smile rise. With respect, she said, in the careful cadence of a person used to being agreed with, people who belong in first class usually know how this works. Overt pull. There was no raised voice in the cabin, only a small drop in temperature. Even the boarding music seemed to step back. Alicia felt the sentence land with a surprising gentleness, like a feather that nonetheless held a stone. She looked directly at the woman, not combative, only present. I know how it works, she said softly. Behind them, a young woman, maybe a college student, had paused in the aisle with her phone angled at her chest, not quite filming, not filming. Alicia noticed but did not engage. Across the way, the silver-haired grandmother pressed her lips together and stared at her folded hands the way people do when they decide not to cry in public. The captain cleared his throat, warmed his tone. Ma'am, he said to Alicia, if you could help us today, it would be appreciated. We can make a note in your profile. Alicia considered him. He seemed decent. She imagined a long career measured in hours aloft and a ledger of small calls made for the comfort of many. She also imagined the story that would settle in each passenger's memory if she stepped aside now. That firmness is rudeness, that dignity is inconvenience, that it is better to be the one who moves. She thought of the holiday to come, of families pouring gravy, of plates made generous, and of the quiet blessing that lives inside fairness. She shifted her bag under the seat of the empty place beside 2A and remained where she was. The captain's radio clicked to life with a soft request from the front office, and he murmured a reply. He would try once more. Alicia could see. He was a careful man. The woman in the camel coat adjusted her scarf and smiled again, relieved by how very nearly done this seemed. Alicia's calm held. It was a kind of calm that has been practiced, the kind you can only have after the thousandth time. She let the cabin sounds return, the rattle of a suitcase wheel struggling with the lip of a bin, the Velcro hiss of a child's shoe strap, a rustle of newspapers. In the galley, a coffee pot clicked home. The scent reached her dark roast, a hint of chocolate, and she felt the small human want to be seated with a cup and a view. She pictured the route east, the desert giving way to plains, then the soft quilt of the Midwest, then the gray slope of the Atlantic light as the plane glided toward the city that remakes itself each year. She imagined her apartment waiting in the early evening, a takeout dinner from the diner on the corner where the servers called everyone honey, and where tipping well felt like a conversation you completed with kindness. She imagined, and then she let the picture go, the way one releases a kite when the wind shifts. Sophia returned with 2 bottles of sparkling water, cradle-like offerings. "We can bring you both beverages," she said, trying to make a small abundance standing for a single right. "We will be closing the door shortly." The request was a request and also not one. Alicia did not raise her voice. She did not explain the long math of her life. She did not say that calm sometimes feels like a choice when really it is the only shelter you have. She simply folded her boarding pass once more between her fingers and kept her place by the window that was supposed to be hers. The aisle behind her tightened. There's always a point in boarding when patience narrows. The businessman with the newspaper lowered it again and studied the overhead light as if he might convince it to speak. Someone farther back made a small sound of disapproval, the kind that hovers between a hum and a sigh. The young woman with the phone took a breath as if she were about to say something and then didn't. Alicia did not mistake any of it. She knew how quickly courtesy can turn to judgment when time is at stake. She knew how the story gets told at gate counters and dinner tables. A difficult passenger, a delay, an inconvenience clothed in principle. She also knew what it cost the body to swallow a small wrong in order to ease the room for others, and how those small wrongs stack like plates that never get washed. Sophia looked to the captain. He looked to the clock only he could see. The woman in the camel coat glanced at Alicia with the soft confidence of a person for whom doors have opened, always. The hush sharpened, and then, as if to tuck the moment into itself, Alicia tightened the boarding pass in her hand, her gaze steady yet hiding a banked, rising anger. The professional smile arrived first, a polished courtesy that matched the warm light of the cabin. But Alicia could hear in a gentle cadence what the smile wished to accomplish. Make the moment smaller than it was and move it out of the way. The attendant her name tag read, Sophia stepped close enough to be private, without excluding anyone who needed to listen. She confirmed the assignment with a practiced glance. The glowing 2A above the window, the paper in Alicia's hand. The woman settled into the seat with the confident ease of habit. Then Sophia offered what sounded like kindness shaped to fit a timetable. There was, she said, an excellent aisle in row 3, very spacious, close to the front. If Alicia would consider it, they could close the door on time. The phrasing was thoughtful, the tone respectful, the message familiar. Please be the one who moves. Alicia heard the words and the air around the words. She kept her expression calm, as if she were listening to a weather report she had already checked, and replied in the same soft register that the cabin seemed to prefer. She would like to sit in the seat printed on her pass. She thanked Sophia for the offer. She did not raise her voice. She did not make a speech. She simply declined to go elsewhere. The woman occupying 2A, Rebecca, though Alicia did not yet know her name, tilted her chin in a way that read as gracious in a photograph and something else in person. "I am sure the airline can accommodate her," she said, with no malice on the surface of the sentence, only the assumption that solutions are often found on the backs of other people's patients. Boarding continued in its usual song. Wheels thunked into overhead bins. Coat sleeves brushed armrests. The public address chime threaded the air. A child somewhere mid-cabin negotiated the terms of a window shade with a parent in whispers that pretended to be secrets. The smell of coffee drifted from the galley again, dark roast and a promise. The businessman across the aisle folded his newspaper with the careful corners of someone who hates a mess and then unfolded it again. The silver-haired grandmother clasped her hands and looked at the light, pulling on her knuckles. The way people stare at touchstones when they want to be steady. Sophia remained polite, because that is how one keeps the peace in spaces designed to move strangers together. She suggested a blanket, sparkling water, extra attention. She spoke of an on-time pushback, the priority of schedules, the choreography that keeps hundreds of travelers in motion on the same day. Alicia listened and remembered other rooms where she had been offered comfort in place of fairness, a softer seat instead of the seat promised. She answered with the same patience she had brought to a week of meetings. Thank you, but she would prefer to sit in 2A. It was not defiance. It was a request to be seen as ordinary. Rebecca turned a small wheel of the conversation a notch tighter. I fly this route every other week, she remarked to no one in particular, as if logging hours somehow rewrote ink on the boarding pass. Platinum status means something. There is a system, and it usually works. The word usually hung there, neat and unfrayed, implying that those who fit the system fit the seat. Around them, a few passengers, sensing the first prickle of delay, began to perform the etiquette of impatience. A throat cleared, a watch checked, a carry-on repositioned for the third time without need. None of it loud, all of it is legible. Sophia excused herself briefly. She would consult and return, and the cabin seemed to hold its breath for the length of a single bar of the boarding music. Alicia remained standing beside the contested seat, her hand resting on the headrest of the empty place across the aisle, as though to steady herself against the small sway of a plane that was not yet moving. She could feel the closeness of eyes and the distance of assumptions. She thought of the hundreds of flights she had taken where nothing happened except the miracle of arriving, and how quickly a single moment could teach a different lesson. When Sophia came back, she did not come alone. The captain's appearance was a kindness, meant to reassure that an adult had entered a room where tempers might rise. Daniel Harris introduced himself in the measured tone of a man trained to balance gravity with calm. He listened to Sophia summarize, then to Alicia, and finally to Rebecca, whose voice warmed with the comfort of being heard by authority. He nodded in all the right places. He thanked everyone for their patience. He spoke of leaving on schedule, of keeping things smooth for the many, and he offered what he called a temporary solution: the aisle seat in row 3, with a promise to make a note in Alicia's profile so that this inconvenience would be acknowledged. It was a reasonable proposal framed by a reasonable man. Alicia felt how carefully it had been sanded, every rough edge removed. She also felt the grain beneath the direction of expectation. She kept her voice even and low, the way one speaks in hospital corridors and sanctuaries. She preferred to sit in the seat that had been given to her when she purchased her ticket. The captain held her gaze a moment longer, as if looking for a lever that would not bruise her dignity. He found none that he wished to pull. Rebecca's politeness frayed a single thread. "We have a rhythm here," she said, "and I do not see why one person should hold up an entire cabin. People who belong in first class usually understand how to help things along." The sentence wore the clothes of the community and carried the weight of a sorting hat. Alicia's chest tightened, not with fury, but with that old, tired ache that arrives when someone mistakes their privilege for procedure. She did not repeat herself. She did not rehearse her ralsum. She met the captain's eyes and allowed the silence to do the work a speech might have done. From farther back, the soft click of a phone camera lens adjusting was the only sharp sound in a room full of wool and carpet. A young woman in a jean jacket hovered near her seat, phone held close to her sternum, as if she were steadying a small bird. Alicia noticed the movement without turning toward it. She thought instead about the word flexible, how it often means that one person bends so many times she begins to forget the shape she had before the bending began. She thought about how older Americans, people like the grandmother across the aisle, learned courtesy as a kind of civic duty, and how courtesy without fairness turns into silence that weighs more than any suitcase. Sophia tried once more, gentle as ever. "Ma'am, if you would help us today, we will take very good care of you. I can bring water as soon as you sit. We will make sure you are comfortable." She offered comfort because that is what she was authorized to offer. Alicia offered an answer because that is what the moment required. "Thank you," she said, "but I will sit in 2A. She did not say because it is mine. She did not need to. The glow above the window said it for her. The way a bell on a courthouse door does not need a caption to be understood. The businessman with the newspaper tried to serve as town elder for a heartbeat. "Sometimes," he said softly to the air, "the aisle is not so bad." He was not unkind, he was only tired. The grandmother in the apple-colored cardigan shifted, as if her bones had voted for decency, and then remembered how long decency sometimes takes. Overhead, the bins closed with tidy thumps, and the door to the jet bridge sighed in a way that suggested finality. The cabin was nearly ready to go anywhere but forward in this single matter. The captain, who did not seem a cruel man, tried to shape the impasse into something that could be filed. "Let us do this," he said, spreading calm with his hands. "Take the aisle today, and I will make sure the record reflects the issue. We will look into it." He could not promise more because his tools were courtesy and a clock. Alicia thought of clocks and of all the times she had adjusted herself to fit their faces. Then she pictured what the grandmother might say later over a late lunch at a diner with a window booth. A woman stood her ground without raising her voice. And it taught me something about what a voice can be. She was about to answer "no, thank you" again when the moment turned a degree, not in volume but in clarity. The young woman in the jean jacket, having hovered between witness and bystander, made her choice. She raised the phone just enough to square the thing in its frame, pressed her thumb, and let the small, bright eye begin to gather what the room wished would go away quietly. A young college student a few rows back lifted her phone and began to livestream the entire scene. The young woman steadied her phone with both hands and spoke in a voice that wanted to be brave and careful at the same time, introducing what her audience was about to see. A hush seemed to pass along the row as passengers realized the cabin had become more than a room. It had become a witness. The aisle lights glowed like a string of small moons, and in that glow, Alicia remained upright, neither theatrical nor withdrawn, simply present beside the window that matched her boarding pass. Chloe's lens took in the configuration of faces. Alicia poised and quiet, Rebecca resettling her scarf as if ownership could be rehearsed, Sophia anchored between duty and the desire to keep everyone unruffled, the captain measuring the cost of another minute. The first comments scrolled on Chloe's screen, words walking over one another. Some were brief, "This looks wrong." Others tried to diagnose, "Is the seat assignment clear?" A few reached for calm, "Let the crew sort it out." It did not matter that many of them were far from this gate in Los Angeles. Their sentences arrived in the cabin like distant weather, shifting a pressure you only notice if you sit still long enough. Chloe narrated what she had seen without heat, repeating the sequence like a town crier who wants the telling to be clean. A boarding pass for 2A, a refusal, a polite request for flexibility that somehow rested on only one pair of shoulders. Rebecca lifted her chin as the attention coalesced around her. I did not consent to being recorded, she told Chloe, the vowels polished to smoothness, and I am a frequent premium customer. She aimed the last phrase at the captain, the way a person hands a favorite coin across a counter. The captain replied in an even tone that the airline discouraged filming but could not govern every device in a public space. He asked, kindly, for discretion. The request hung in the air without landing. Alicia did not shift toward or away from the camera. She remained focused on the concrete matter of the seat and on the more abstract matter of how the cabin held that matter. She heard the familiar music of restraint in Rebecca's voice, a melody that has played in many rooms, the appeal to status, the invocation of procedure, the calm suggestion that the quickest cure is for one person to take the medicine. She also heard the grandmother across the aisle sigh another silent prayer into her clasped fingers. Linda Perez, who had watched the exchange with a stillness that suggested long practice, unlatched her seatbelt and stood. My name is Linda Perez, she said, offering her press card the way a nurse offers credentials at a door, not to intimidate but to clarify the role she plays. I am a reporter with the New York Times. I am observing a dispute about a confirmed seat assignment. I would like to confirm the facts. Her voice was a steady plank laid over rising water. Sophia looked relieved and wary at once. Miss Perez, she said with courtesy, we are working to resolve this. Linda nodded. Of course. My notes will reflect both your efforts and the sequence. Then, it would have been easy for the moment to unspool into competing performances, but the cabin had the old discipline of trains and theaters. People mostly kept their bodies in their seats and allowed their eyes to travel. The businessman folded his newspaper again and did not lift it a third time. 2 rows back, a young man set aside his laptop and leaned forward, elbows on knees, the posture of someone who has decided to pay attention. The boarding music clicked off, and the resulting quiet made sentences sound truer, or at least more exposed. Sophia tried a different door. Miss Carter, she said, and her use of the name was a small recognition that mattered. We can offer you 3C with additional amenities. We understand this is not ideal, Alicia answered gently. I appreciate that, truly. My boarding pass says 2A. The repetition was not stubbornness. It was the rhythm of a drumbeat that calls the parade back to its route. Chloe's narration softened as her viewers multiplied. She described Alicia's restraint in tones that resembled a radio host guiding listeners through a traffic delay without scolding the road. Comments rolled in with the slightly formal cadence of people who know they're being overheard by more than the room. A reserved seat should be honored. The crew may be under pressure. The woman standing has been very patient. A few voices wondered whether Alicia might accept the aisle just this once, as if fairness were a coat you take off in warm weather and put on again later. Other voices answered that winter always returns. Rebecca's politeness thinned. Platinum status has protocols, she said to Linda, as though the reporter were the clerk at a familiar boutique. We sometimes have these mix-ups. Those who travel often know how to be, well, helpful. The slight pause before helpful was not long, but it was long enough for the word to collect meanings like burrs. Alicia felt the burrs without letting them catch. She looked toward the window that was not yet hers, and could almost see the blue-gray line of the country that she had crossed so many times it felt like a sentence she could recite. May I ask a direct question? Linda said, and the captain gestured for her to continue. Miss Carter has shown a boarding pass for 2A. Is there any documentation indicating that the other passenger has 2A? Sophia shook her head. No documentation at this time. Then the issue is not availability, Linda concluded, voice even, but whether a confirmed assignment can be displaced by preference. Her pen moved, an old instrument that makes a sound as gentle as rain. The ordinary courtesies were thinning to their threads when the sentence arrived, not shouted, not even particularly loud, but clear enough to draw a line on the floor. People like her, Rebecca said, eyes on Linda, do not usually sit in first class. She said it almost academically, like someone quoting a statistic she once heard. The effect was not academic. You could feel the cabin relearn silence, a heavier silence that has mass and shape. The young man 2 rows back sat straighter as if the air had added a new ingredient. The grandmother looked up from her hands. The businessman let out one measured breath. He had no intention of making a second. Chloe did not interrupt. She did not need to. The words had the self-reporting quality of things that do not require commentary. The stream's comments shifted in tone. That was unkind. That sounded like prejudice. Some tried to soothe the pleading energy of people who dislike conflict more than they dislike injustice. Others spoke with the authority of lived experience. I have heard that line in different rooms, and it always means the same thing. The captain's jaw changed. His eyes moved not to Alicia, but to Rebecca. And in that small redirection, there was an acknowledgement, a correction even, that the earlier balance had not held. He addressed the cabin in a tempered voice. We want to treat all passengers with respect. We will honor the boarding pass assignments as printed. His decision had the clean simplicity of a bell struck once. In a just world, that would have been the end of it. Rebecca blinked, the way a person blinks when the script does not follow the marks she memorized. She grasped for another line. "This is creating a scene," she told the captain. And then, to Linda, "You are making a spectacle out of a simple accommodation request." Linda did not raise her pen. "Miss Collins," she said, first name and last name together, soft and firm. "The spectacle is in the words, not the notebook." Sophia took a half step as if to place her body gently between heat and tinder. "Let us all take a breath," she said, and her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who has walked crying toddlers without waking the roll behind them. "We have procedures. We will follow them." She turned to Alicia. "Miss Carter, I will ask you to take your seat as assigned." The sentence restored the room to its original blueprints. Alicia thanked her. She did not move yet. She was not stalling. She was feeling the shape of what had just happened. The sentence people like her had was placed on the floor and then stepped over, but not erased. She thought of how words linger after planes land, how they ride home in carry-ons and recline on couches later that evening, how they arrive at dinners and sit between people. She also thought of what Chloe's audience was learning in real time, how dignity sounds when it chooses itself without apology. Chloe, relieved and still trembling with borrowed adrenaline, continued narrating, calmer now that a path had been named. "The crew will follow the assignment," she said. And her viewers replied with small paragraphs that respected the medium enough to be complete sentences. One person wrote that dignity has a timbre you can hear even on the phone. Another wrote that fairness should not have to argue for itself. Linda jotted 2 final notations and sat down, the restrained choreography of a professional who understands that witnesses occasionally do the work of protection just by standing up. Sophia gestured toward the seat. Alicia inclined her head. It should have been that simple, and perhaps it would have been if the line on the floor had not troubled Rebecca's foot. "I feel unsafe," she said suddenly, and the word unsafe tumbled a drawer open inside the cabin where fears are kept and mislabeled. "I feel harassed by the filming and by being challenged this way." It was an old move, drawing the net of security over oneself when the net had been woven for someone else. The captain breathed once in and once out. He had heard this before and knew its shapes. "Safety is our priority," he answered, "and safety includes fairness." He nodded to Sophia to proceed with boarding as assigned. Sophia nodded back, the simplest salute. Chloe's camera caught the exchange with the quiet awe of someone watching a complicated knot release with a single pull. As Alicia turned at last toward 2A, Rebecca added a final small stone. "She's dressed like she belongs in a coach," she murmured. Perhaps to herself, perhaps to the air. The sentence was too soft for the back rows, but not too soft for those nearby. The grandmother's eyes sharpened. She did not stand, but in her stillness, she looked like someone who had decided that if called upon, she would lend her voice. The businessman crumpled a page corner on his newspaper and smoothed it back again, the tiniest protest he would allow himself in public. The cabin had learned too much to return to its earlier lightness. Even the view through the window seemed changed, the tarmac a shade grayer, the fuel truck's movement more deliberate. Alicia reached toward the overhead to settle her bag and paused, sensing the weight of many rooms in this one room, the boardroom, where a different tone might click the lock behind a similar sentence, the hotel lobby where politeness curdles into sorting, the restaurant where an open table remains mysteriously occupied for everyone but you. She glanced toward Chloe, who lowered the phone a few inches, as if to give Alicia a moment outside the frame. "Thank you for your patience," Sophia said to no one and to everyone, a phrase that airlines print on paper cups and also mean at least some of the time. Alicia nodded in acknowledgement, an exchange between two women doing their work inside different sets of constraints. She's allowed to sit down now, Alicia thought, and the sentence was so small it almost broke her heart. She did not want gratitude for the restoration of something that had never been lost on paper. Linda, fastening her belt again, caught Alicia's eye and offered a look that said more than a notebook would carry. "I saw." Alicia returned a look that said something just as specific. "I know." The plane seemed to inhale, a great machine preparing to become a sky animal. Someone laughed softly 3 rows back, an ordinary laugh that did not belong to this scene at all and therefore felt like mercy. Chloe whispered into her phone that she would end the stream for now and resume if needed. Then, because she was young and honest, she added, "I hope it is not needed." She closed her eyes and let the camera rest against her sweatshirt. Alicia had not yet taken a seat. She stood with her hand on the armrest, feeling the steadiness she had learned to build for herself when rooms did not offer it. She looked at the captain, who gave a small nod that was more human than official. She looked at Sophia, who had already moved to help another passenger with a bag that did not wish to fit. She looked at the grandmother, who smiled once, quickly, as if passing a folded note across the desk. Then, Alicia allowed herself one small, private retreat into the quiet booth of her own breath. She closed her eyes and drew a long, steady breath. Her hand touched the phone in her pocket, the signal that she was preparing for the unexpected move. A uniformed airport officer stepped into the cabin, scanning faces with the neutral alertness of someone trained to enter rooms where feelings might be louder than facts. The door had been closed, the plane wore the hush that comes when the engine hum has not yet started, and yet everyone feels time moving. Everything smelled faintly of recirculated air, citrus cleaner, and the last brew of coffee from the galley. Alicia stood where she had been standing, beside the window that should have been hers. Her shoulders relaxed by choice more than by ease. The officer's gaze touched the seat numbers, touched the captain, then settled on Alicia with professional calm as he introduced himself and asked if they might step into the galley to talk. She declined softly, saying she preferred to resolve the question about her assigned seat here in the open where it had begun. The refusal was not a performance. It was a way of keeping the truth in daylight. The live stream kept running somewhere behind her shoulder. The young student's voice was lower now. The way people talk in museums and chapels, viewers had multiplied into the kind of crowd that has weight you can feel even when you cannot see it. A few passengers glanced down at their phones for confirmation that the moment they were living in was also the moment the world was watching. The reporter, Linda Perez, remained seated, but alert, pen poised. Her expression, the quiet you learn after years of hearings and courtrooms and school board meetings where the shape of fairness is argued into being. The flight attendant, Sophia, did her precise work at the edge of the scene, stowing a bag, easing a coat into a bin, straightening a service curtain as if to keep the room stitched while a seam strained. The officer kept his tone neutral, the way a good chess player keeps his face. He explained that if Alicia would simply relocate to an aisle in the same cabin, they could push back and address any concerns with customer service on arrival. He allowed that he understood her position. He also stressed the importance of keeping the peace. Alicia listened with the respect she gives anyone doing a job that asks for calm under scrutiny. She answered with equal calm. Her boarding pass said 2A, and she would like to sit there. The sentence was a thread pulled through the whole morning infancy, unadorned, strong. Rebecca, wrapped in her camel coat as if it were a title, spoke with a measured courtesy that pretended to bend while refusing to move. She described herself as a frequent premium traveler, accustomed to a certain rhythm, certain accommodations. She did not say outright that the rhythm involved other people stepping aside, but the music was there for anyone who had ever been asked to dance to it. When she insisted that filming made her feel exposed, the captain acknowledged her discomfort and repeated, gently, that the airline discouraged recording but could not forbid devices in a public space. He was trying, with all the tools he had, voice, posture, a small repertoire of phrases polished by years, to keep a tight knot from slipping. Alicia felt the knot in her sternum all the same. She had not eaten breakfast, only a quick cup of coffee at the gate, and now she could feel the thin line between patience and blood sugar. She thought of the grandmother across the aisle whose hands had so faithfully held each other since boarding, and she pictured the woman later that day in a bright diner booth with the sun on the laminate table, a friendly server calling her dear and topping off her coffee without being asked, a tip tucked under the receipt with the tidy decisiveness of a moral conclusion. She wanted that woman to have a story to tell at lunch that would not make the pie taste like regret. Linda cleared her throat, a small human sound that asked permission to be heard. Captain, she said for my notes, do you have any documentation assigning this seat to Miss Collins? The captain answered that they did not. Linda nodded once, wrote once, and folded into silence, the way a good librarian closes a book partway through and keeps her finger on the page. The officer, sensing the shifting balance, asked again whether Alicia would consider stepping into the galley for a moment to talk. He framed it as privacy. She recognized it as removal. She kept her voice warm. She would stay here. It was then that Rebecca's manners cracked along a hairline already visible to anyone who had listened closely. This is ridiculous, she said, careful with her volume, careless with her judgment. People like her do not usually sit up here, and now we are all delayed because she will not help. The sentence did not slap. It seeped. The way cold seeps into a room through a window you forgot to seal before winter. You could feel bodies stiffen as a dozen private histories stood up at once inside a dozen quiet hearts. The businessman across the aisle laid his newspaper down with deliberate care, as if the paper had become a stand-in for something he could not set down any other way. The grandmother let her hands part and rest, palms open, a posture that looked like small prayer and larger readiness. Chloe, the student, did not interrupt. Her breath steadied, and the stream continued to witness in the unadorned voice of someone who knows that a camera can be a lantern when the room wishes to dim itself. Comments arrived with the old-fashioned rhythm of complete sentences. A confirmed seat should be honored. Courtesy matters, but so does fairness. The crew is under pressure. The passenger has been patient. There was kindness in some of it, fatigue in some, clarity in more than a little. Alicia felt none of the words on her skin. She felt only the familiar tremor a person knows when dignity must push through the membrane of decorum to breathe. Sophia took one step closer, the kind of small step only someone trained would notice. "Miss Carter," she said, "we would like to make this right." Alicia believed her. She also believed that right here had a simple shape. The captain glanced at the officer, then at the cabin door, then back at Alicia. He spoke with the authority that comes not from volume but from agreement with oneself. They would honor the boarding pass as printed. He asked Miss Collins to vacate 2A. The sentence landed like a key finally turning cleanly in a lock. For a heartbeat, it seemed finished. Then Rebecca chose a different tactic, old as courthouse tiles and newer than any app in the room. "I feel unsafe," she said, shaping the word as if it were a parachute that would open above her. "I feel harassed by being filmed and challenged." Unsafe is a powerful instrument. It can summon procedures meant for storms and point them at a person standing in a drizzle. The officer's posture tightened by a degree. The captain's eyes flickered with the calculation of consequences. Sophia looked, for the first time all morning, truly tired. Alicia heard the word and recognized its many lives. She had seen it used to open doors that stayed shut for others and to close doors on people who were simply asking to be let in. Her own heart did not quicken. It clarified. She turned to face Rebecca fully, her voice low enough that it required the room to pay attention. "You said that people like me do not belong here," she said. "All right, let me show you who I am." The calm in her tone was not a trick. It was the steel that forms when heat has been applied too long. For a moment, the plane felt like a hallway between two eras, one lined with framed photographs of how things have been, the other a clean wall waiting for a nail. The officer shifted his weight, preparing for the kind of escalation that requires moving bodies through space. Linda tilted her head as if to hear better the sound of a page turning. The grandmother sat taller, the businessman went very still, and the student with the phone steadied her hands without thinking. Alicia reached into the pocket of her sweater, found the familiar rectangle of glass, and brought it into her palm with the unhurried certainty of someone taking down the book she has read before and will read again. She pulled out her phone, opened the special application with the American Airlines logo, and the entire cabin went silent. The screen glowed in Alicia's palm with a quiet authority, the kind of blue-white that makes instruments look like truth. And for a heartbeat, the cabin's many sounds, zippers, sighs, the soft clack of a galley latch fell into a respectful hush. She scrolled with a practiced economy, the way a surgeon reaches for a familiar instrument without looking, and the application opened to a panel that most passengers would never see. A control room disguised as a menu where her credentials lived, not as boasting but as a key. She did not dramatize it. She did not raise her chin or seek the camera's eye. She simply authenticated, and in the steady glow of the phone appeared a simple line of text that carried the weight of a gavel. "Chief Executive Override for Flight 726. The captain read the words as if they had been spoken aloud. Sophia saw them reflected in Alicia's glasses, and Linda Perez, with reporter's instinct, leaned just enough to fix the phrase in memory for later verification. Chloe's Livestream found the screen for a breath and then panned up to Alicia's face, catching not triumph but a sober clarity, the look of a person doing something necessary rather than something grand. Alicia's voice was low, the voice one uses in a library or a chapel when she spoke to the captain first, identifying herself. Alicia Carter, Chief Executive of Phoenix Capital, a controlling stakeholder in American Airlines, and then explaining, in sentences free of heat, that she was invoking internal authority to halt the movement of Flight 726 until a confirmed assignment was honored. She did not recite percentages. She did not speak in the swollen grammar of power. She said only what was needed and waited, steady as a lighthouse, while the systems that govern airplanes and rooms and assumptions recalibrated around a single passenger's refusal to be moved. In the seconds that followed, the cabin held two kinds of silence: the respectful quiet of people sensing a boundary they had not recognized before, and the restored quiet of procedure finding its spine. The captain, to his credit, did not let pride cloud his face. He had flown too many years to take a correction as an insult, and when the flight deck chime sounded, he answered, listened, and then returned his eyes to Alicia with a professionalism that made the moment feel less like a victory than like a reset. The radio murmured, deliberate, and spare. And soon, a message came from the ground, by directive of company authority, Flight 726, to return to the gate. The words were not theatrical, but the effect was, and you could feel it pass through the cabin like a pressure change. Before a storm overhead bins holding their breath, newspapers halted mid-fold, a child's whisper turning into awe. Chloe said in her careful narrator's tone that the aircraft would be taxiing back because the airline's own leadership had stepped in, and the comments on her stream, now numbering in the many thousands, shifted from anxious petitions to something steadier, as if a chorus had finally found the right key. Linda's hand moved across her notebook with the discipline of someone trained to catch history in small strokes, names, titles, the exact language of the directive. and she placed a discreet call to her editor, using the polite code reporters share when news is both sensitive and inevitable. Sophia, who had kept the room stitched without visible seams, stepped closer to Alicia and, in a voice meant for one person alone, said thank you, not for the disruption, but for the clarity. She turned then to Rebecca with the same professionalism, asking her to stand so that the seat could be returned to its rightful occupant. Rebecca's composure, polished by many flights and many rooms, where her preferences were translated into policy, thinned to a translucent film. She rose, but in the rise was the stiffness of someone who has never practiced making room. Her handbag moved like a small barricade. Her scarf became a flag lowered without ceremony, and when she sat in the alternate seat Sophia indicated, she did so with the posture of someone obeying a rule that does not feel like hers. Alicia did not step into 2A yet. She allowed the ritual of correction to proceed with dignity, because rituals protect us from turning necessary moments into cruel ones. Only when Sophia smoothed the seatbelt and the captain gave a single confirming nod did Alicia place her bag in the footwell and sit, not as a conqueror, but as a traveler reclaiming something ordinary. The cabin exhaled, not in applause, not in theater, but in that collective release you hear when fairness, at last, takes its chair. Outside the oval of glass, the tug arrived with the dutiful patience of airport machinery, and the plane began to inch in a slow arc that felt like punctuation. The radio, translated into cabin announcements, explained the return to the gate in neutral terms, and if the wording lacked the full story, the faces in the room supplied it. The businessman across the aisle relaxed the tight triangle of his shoulders. The grandmother's hands, which had prayed by habit and hope, unfolded into her lap like a hymn concluded. A young man 2 rows back pressed his palms together and then apart, a private gesture of relief. Chloe, with deliberate restraint, told her viewers the tag people were using justice in the air, spelling it plainly rather than dressing it with symbols, and added in words that sounded older than her ears. That sometimes a person stands so others can sit where they belong. Linda reached the desk at the other end of her phone and delivered a clean paragraph, a verified seat, an attempted displacement softened as accommodation, a declaration of authority, a directive to return, and the broader question this small theater raised about courtesy and its limits. Procedure followed the path it always follows. Once a decision has been made, a gate agent notified, a supervisor looped in, a timestamp entered, service cards aligned like chess pieces awaiting the next round. Sophia moved through the cabin with the light touch of someone who knows that restored order is fragile at first. She offered water in plastic cups that whispered when lifted, and when she paused at Alicia's row, the exchange was simple. A quiet thank you from Sophia, a quiet you're welcome from Alicia. Both women meeting as professionals who had been required to perform difficult roles under bright light. Rebecca watched, and the watching changed her face. Power leaves a mark when it moves, and on hers, the mark looked like bewilderment shading into the first acknowledgments of shame. She murmured something about not having known about the identity, about the authority, and the sentence fluttered in the air, looking for a place to land. Perhaps she wanted to hand the moment back to Alicia by calling it a misunderstanding of rank, a failure to Google before judging, but Alicia's refusal had never been about title. And Linda, whose ear is tuned to the pitch of such moments, wrote a line that would not make the story cruel but would make it precise. The remedy came from power, the injury did not. In the front, the captain received one more confirmation from operations and relayed without flourish that, upon arrival at the gate, there would be a brief pause while formalities were completed. The cabin accepted the phrasing like a civics lesson: dry, decent, sufficient. Chloe, her hands steadier now, told her audience she would keep recording until the aircraft reached the gate and then hand off to whatever came next. She did not invent drama. She did not prod. She kept the lantern up and left the moral to reveal itself, as good narrators do when the scene is already full. Alicia's phone dimmed and went dark in her hand. The device had done its work. What remained was quieter and, in a way, heavier. The weight of having to use an extraordinary lever to restore an ordinary seat. She thought of all the times she had wished that strength could stay in its sheath and not be drawn just to win back what paper already promised. She thought, too, of the grandmother across the aisle who would tell this later in the language of kitchens and living rooms, and of the little lesson that might travel with the story that dignity can be calm and unshowy and still be a force that turns a plane. When a soft voice from air traffic control instructed Flight 726 to taxi back, the captain repeated it with the clean edges of a command that contains no insult, only direction, and the nose wheel traced its obedient line. Alicia felt the motion as a release and as a charge. Release from the grip of a single person's certainty, charge to say something that reached past the narrow frame of winning a seat. Rebecca looked over, eyes bright, not with anger now, but with the water light of someone whose script has been ruined in public. Her voice, when it came, was small and human and true in its way. She said she had not known who Alicia was. The sentence sought mercy, and Alicia would not make a spectacle of refusing it. She met Rebecca's gaze, flat, calm, and answered in words that belonged more to the ground than to the sky, words a radio host might read slowly so that every listener could hear themselves inside them. The issue is not that you did not know who I am. The issue is that you refuse to recognize me as an ordinary human being. The jet bridge kissed the fuselage with a soft thud and a sigh, and the cabin felt the pressure loosen, as if the room itself could finally breathe. The captain made the kind of announcement that lives on paper rather than in hearts, informing passengers that the aircraft would remain at the gate for a short while and thanking everyone for their patience. He did not repeat what had already been understood. Outside the oval window, ground crew moved with the steady purpose of people who know their tasks by muscle memory. Inside, the hush rearranged itself into the ordinary murmur of coats shrugged on and bags tugged from bins. Alicia remained seated in 2A, not guarding the space but resting in it, the way a person rests in her own name. She looked down at her phone now gone dark and then slipped it into her sweater pocket. She had done what was necessary. The rest would be done in the open. When the door opened, the air changed as if a weather front had arrived. A gate supervisor stepped in first, wearing the calm that can only be learned the hard way. Behind her came a senior operations manager with a tablet, and behind him the quiet throng of cameras, because word had moved faster than people. Linda Perez stood with them, a press badge tucked so that it could be seen without being waved. She had made one call and then another, not to inflame but to verify. The aisle became a narrow boulevard where decency and protocol would walk side by side. Sophia moved there too, smoothing the path with that particular grace of hospitality. A spare blanket folded, a bag re-angled, a service curtain eased back into place, as if it were a curtain in a small theater that had suddenly found itself playing host to a civic meeting. The supervisor spoke to the captain in a voice the cabin could hear without straining. Procedures would be followed. A formal note of the incident was already opened. Passenger safety included the safety of a promise printed on the boarding pass. The officer from earlier had returned and now stood a respectful distance from everything present but not imposing. The manager approached Alicia and, without preface, thanked her for her patience and for staying calm under pressure. He did not ask for proof. Proof was the morning. He then turned to Rebecca and, with the same professional tone, explained that a permanent revocation of flying privileges was being entered, pending review that would be prompt rather than protracted. The words were not delivered with relish. They were delivered as a necessary conclusion to a sequence of choices. Rebecca's shoulders settled as if a long-held pose had finally tired. She asked whether the filming could be erased. The supervisor answered with kindness and fact. The airline could request courtesy but could not require oblivion. The moment belonged now to everyone who had lived it and everyone who had witnessed it. The businessman across the aisle looked down at his newspaper as if it had become heavy. The grandmother folded her hands and lifted her chin with the quiet pride of someone watching standards enforced in a room that had not been designed with her in mind. Chloe had ended the stream at the captain's request during the taxi and had started it again when the door opened. She did not point the camera into faces without consent. She let it rest on details that told a fuller truth than a close-up. The glow of the seat number above 2A, the neat badge on Sophia's uniform, the steady hands of the supervisor as she took notes, the small reflection of Alicia's sweater in the window glass. She narrated it as a good radio host would, giving listeners the shape and the temperature of the room rather than the gossip. She said that the airline had returned to the gate and that fairness was being named with the same confidence that delays are usually named. She said that a confirmed seat had been defended and that the larger lesson of the morning felt older than any device in her hand. The operations manager asked Alicia whether she wished to deplane now or remain until later flight. His words were wrapped in respect. Alicia stood and spoke clearly so that the cabin would not have to invent her answer later. She said that this was not about punishment. It was about truth restored in public. She said that she would leave the aircraft and address the press briefly to prevent rumor from outrunning fact. She glanced at Sophia and the captain and thanked them, not for perfection, but for the course correction. Sophia's eyes brightened in the way a person's eyes brighten when they have been named kindly in front of others. They stepped into the jet bridge as a small group, the way people step from stage to hallway after a performance, not giddy, not dour, just aware that something has shifted and that many will have opinions about the shifting. The walk to gate C-17 took only moments, and yet it felt like a processional in miniature. At the gate, the afternoon light slid down the polished floor and made a bright runway toward the microphones that had been rolled in with unfussy efficiency. A cluster of reporters stood behind the stanchion, their voices low, their pens ready. A few travelers paused with their rolling bags and leaned into the scene as if it were a painting they had not expected to see in a terminal. Alicia stepped to the microphones and did not read from a statement. Her tone was warm and measured, the tone of a person teaching a lesson she believes will make the next hour easier for strangers. She said her name. She said that she was a controlling stakeholder in the airline and the chief executive of a firm called Phoenix Capital. She said that the facts of the morning were simple. A seat assignment had been challenged without cause, and the challenge had been defended by habit and by hierarchy rather than by policy. She said that she used an internal authority that she would rather never use to haul the aircraft until the promise on the paper was kept. Then she said the part that mattered most to her. She said that none of this should require a title or a special key. It ought to require only ordinary respect. The microphones picked up breath as well as speech. Alicia continued, choosing sentences that would be friendly to the ear of a listener in a kitchen or a car. She said that the airline would answer with policy, because policy, properly written, outlives personalities. She outlined 3 immediate steps that would begin before the week's end. First, training that addresses implicit bias will be expanded in both length and depth, not as a box checked, but as a skill practiced. Second, a clear reporting channel will be opened to receive and resolve passenger complaints of discrimination with speed and transparency, and an independent ombudsperson would review patterns rather than only incidents. Third, cabin procedures would be revised to prevent ad hoc displacement masked as accommodation. She said these changes would not be slogans. They would have budgets, calendars, and names responsible. Reporters asked measured questions. One asked whether Alicia feared that the use of extraordinary authority would become the story rather than the wrong it corrected. Alicia smiled, not with triumph, with recognition. Power is a tool, she said, and like any tool, it can be used to build or to bruise. Today, it built a small shelter around basic fairness. The goal is to build a house that makes that shelter unnecessary. Another asked whether the passenger who had made the remarks would face additional consequences. The supervisor answered that the ban would be permanent and that the incident would be shared with partner carriers as a matter of safety and conduct. A third asked whether the crew would be disciplined. The captain stepped to the microphones briefly and said that reviews were already underway, that training would be part of the remedy, and that accountability would not be symbolic. During a pause, the grandmother from the cabin arrived at the gate with careful steps. She did not approach the microphones. She waited near the rope and caught Alicia's eye. Alicia nodded to her, and the woman raised her hand in a small salute that was more tender than formal. The businessman with the newspaper stood farther back with his carry-on and, after a visible wrestle with shyness, lifted his folded paper as if to say he had been present for the facts and would tell them straight at dinner. Chloe narrated the scene in sentences that fit together like wooden blocks and then lowered her phone, letting the moment exist without the lens. She had the sense, rare and sweet, that the story did not need her anymore. Linda asked the last question. It was not a trap. It was an invitation to clarity. She asked Alicia what she would say to older Americans who might be watching and who had seen too many rooms where a quiet wrong was allowed to pass for the sake of keeping the peace. Alicia answered to the invisible audience as if speaking from a Sunday radio program. She said that peace is not the absence of noise. It is the presence of fairness. She said that many in her parent generation had already taught her that we do not hand decency off to the next person in line. We practice it ourselves, in the line we are already in, at the gate we are already near. Clarity did not erase the ache of the morning. There is a cost to insisting, and Alicia felt it like a weight in her shoulders. Yet there was also the easing that follows when a room refuses to agree to something false. The gate crowd shifted back into travel, as crowds must. People returned to their journeys, and the sound of rolling bags filled the air like rain on the roof. The supervisor and the manager thanked Alicia once more and peeled off to begin the long, dull, noble work of turning promises into procedures. The captain and Sophia spoke quietly at the side, the particular candor of colleagues who had stood together in the weather and who would stand again. Alicia stepped away from the microphones. Ethan Brooks had arrived, precise as always, and moved alongside her with gentle efficiency, already coordinating the practical next steps, already fielding messages. A familiar anchor from a national network nodded hello, and Alicia nodded back without pausing for a second interview. She was tired, and there is wisdom in ending cleanly. As she turned toward the concourse, a ripple of soft applause rose from the gate area. Not a performance, not a chant, but a caress, the way strangers sometimes thank one another for making a hard thing simpler. Alicia glanced over her shoulder and lifted her hand in acknowledgement, palm open, a gesture of greeting and closure at once. She stopped once more before disappearing into the flow of travelers and spoke into a smaller microphone held by a local public radio producer who had waited patiently at the edge. In the same warm tone that had carried through the larger press scrum, Alicia offered a final sentence meant to travel easily into living rooms and car interiors. Fairness, she said, is not a luxury we bring out for the important. It is a habit we owe one another in the smallest places. Then she thanked the producer, and it followed Ethan into the corridor, where the bright signs for coffee and sandwiches glowed like a promise of ordinary life. Later, when she finally sat at a quiet table in a corner cafe with a cup refilled without being asked and a slice of pie that tasted of cinnamon and relief, Alicia exhaled the long breath she had been holding since the boarding door first closed. She watched families consult departure boards and older couples share half sandwiches with the easy choreography of years. She let the clatter of plates and the low hum of conversation rinse the last of the morning from her muscles. She did not replay every sentence. She let the room be itself, a place where everyone belonged by the simple fact of having arrived. Across the terminal, Chloe sent a final update to her followers, careful and modest, and then texted her mother that she would be home in time for dinner. The captain filed a report with the words chosen as carefully as he chose weather routes, and Sophia completed a form that would feed into training sessions she hoped would matter. The supervisor locked the band, and the manager drafted a memo that began with a sentence that should have begun many memos before. We will not disguise displacement as accommodation. In her notebook, Linda drew a line under the day's account and wrote a single sentence to close her notes. A sentence that did not oversimplify and did not scold. A sentence that would help her remember the shape of the morning long after airports had returned to being only airports. Today, a black woman turned an airplane cabin into a courtroom of justice. In the stillness that followed, what lingered was not the sound of authority or the weight of punishment, but the gentle truth that dignity belongs to everyone who boards a plane, walks into a cafe, or takes a seat at a family table. The journey had begun with suspicion and resistance, yet it ended with a calm reminder that fairness, once spoken aloud, can steady even the most turbulent rooms. For those who watched closely, the lesson was plain. Justice does not always roar. It often arrives in a steady voice, asking only that promises be honored. Much like the warmth of a lamp left burning in the window for travelers returning late, a single act of respect can guide us back toward the home we all share. As you reflect on this story, take a moment to notice the quiet kindnesses that surround you. And if this tale touched your heart, consider passing that warmth to someone still waiting in the dark.